How did global and European electric vehicle markets perform in 2025? Which brands sold the most EVs? And how has one model navigated EU countervailing duties? This is the Automotive Update, presented by AutoVista24. Hello and welcome to the Automotive Update. I'm Tom Geggus, the editor of AutoVista24, here with the biggest headlines from the last 7 days. This week, AutoVista24 dived into the latest figures from EV volumes. To help me explore the winning brands is AutoVista24 journalist Tom Hooker. Hi, Tom.
Hi there. I'm very excited to jump into this one because there's no hiding with these kinds of sales figures. So let's see who the winners and losers in 2025 were.
Absolutely, Tom. Well, I think before we jump right in, why don't we clarify a few things first? Because when we're talking about electric vehicle sales, we mean sales of new models in the passenger car market. And when we say electric vehicles, we are combining battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, and plug-in hybrids, or PHEVs. And EV volumes does include extended range electric vehicles in its PHEV category.
Okay, Tom, so we've been building up the anticipation enough already. How did electric vehicle sales perform in 2025 if we're looking at the global market?
Well, all in all, the global electric vehicle market continued to grow last year, so that's a good thing. Some 21 million new plug-in units hit the roads across the world, and that means about a 20.9% increase, so good news. But it's important to note that that growth rate has actually been slowing. We saw a growth of some 108% back in 2021, and since then, EVs, the market for them has been slowing, so down from over 100% in 2021, then down to around 55% in 2022, 35% in 2023, and 26.4% in 2024. So still good, but the rate of growth is definitely coming down. And the important thing to note is, because you're looking at the combined results of two different powertrains, one is slightly more responsible for that growth than the other, because the majority of those units in the EV market are BEVs. But PHEVs have been seeing slightly better growth.
That's really interesting, Tom, because in Europe, we also saw growth, but there's a bit of a different trend going on. In 2025, there was a 31.3% improvement in Europe with 3,881,325 EVs taking to the road. This was the steepest growth in the continent since 2021, and it marked a bit of a bounce back after there was a decline in 2024. Now, if we break down that result even further, in the fourth quarter, there was more than 1 million sales recorded. This is the first time that in a quarter, the 1 million threshold has been surpassed. This also marked the continent's best quarterly improvement since the third quarter of 2021, and it also meant that we saw double-digit growth in every quarter of 2025, and volumes sort of gradually lifted up throughout the year. We started with a 20% improvement in the first quarter, and then, this slowly sort of ramped up throughout the year.
Amazing. Now, obviously, Europe has done really well towards the end of the year, and then thinking about that as a component of the global EV market, it's still a relatively small percentage because so many electric vehicles are still being sold in China. Now, Phil Curry, AutoVista24 special content editor, is going to be covering China as well this week, and make sure you check out the show notes for a link. But in the meantime, I think it's a good point actually to start talking about some of these brands and how we're breaking down who is really selling the most units, because at the very top of the global EV sellers list, and pause here, if you want to take a guess, you can, maybe leave a comment in the show notes down on Spotify. The biggest selling brand for EVs in 2025 was BYD, and it raced ahead with a 19% share of the global EV market, a huge feat. But the thing is, if you start looking at that again comparatively with 2024, that market share was actually down by 3.2 percentage points year on year. So the increasing competition in the marketplace is really starting to erode that lead. Even though it's still a huge lead, it is a little bit smaller than last year. And I think that's even more pronounced for some other brands. But before we get into those, Tom, Maybe take us through Europe. Who was leading there?
Sure. So in Europe, we saw Volkswagen lead the market, and this was amid a 86.8% growth for the brand. They saw over 400,000 new electric vehicles delivered in 2025 alone. In turn, its market share went from 7.7% in 2024 to 11% in 2025. And yeah, I think this was a little bit of a comeback year when we talk about VW in terms of electric vehicle sales, because it's the first time that they led the European EV market since 2021.
Definitely a big comeback year for Volkswagen in Europe, Tom, as you say. And then if we look at its performance globally, it actually sold 568,000 odd units across the world, and that was up by 25.1%. Now, again, if I return very quickly to BYD, I can give you a sense of scale here, because in 2025, BYD sold nearly 4 million plug-in vehicles. And a big part of its sales in that point was models like the BYD Seagull, also known as the Dolphin Surf, the BYD Song Plus, also known as the CLU, and the BYD QN Plus. And they have just this enormous range of models to pick from, ranging from BEVs to PHEVs. And that puts it in quite stark contrast to some other car makers, such as Tesla, which took a 7.8% market share last year, but with far fewer models. Of course, they have the Tesla Model Y, which accounted for some 66% of its EV sales last year, the Tesla Model 3, which was just over 30%, and then taking a really marginal percentage share of Tesla's EV sales last year was the Cybertruck, the Model X, and the Model S. But then you're probably asking, okay, Tom, so just how many units did it sell? And the answer is 1,635,753. And that meant it accounted for 7.8% of global deliveries. Unfortunately for Tesla, this was down on 2024 by 8.5%. And that meant that its market share also dropped, down by 2.5 percentage points. How did Tesla do more specifically in Europe, Tom?
It's a great question. And we saw quite a similar model split for Tesla, with the Model Y playing a dominant role in the brand's overall sales. Then you had the Model 3 making up just over a third of Tesla's total units. I think ultimately Tesla did face some struggles in Europe in 2025. We have to remember that they took the title in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Yet in 2025, they fell to fourth. And this was after enduring a 27.1% sales decline to 238,511 units. Of course, unsurprisingly, in turn, its market share fell from a commanding 11.1% down to 6.1%. And you mentioned BYD a bit earlier, Tom. They saw a completely opposite trend to Tesla in 2025. Instead of a 27.1% decline, BYD saw a 271.8% growth year on year. And this equated to 187,112 units. So that was good enough for eighth, still not anywhere near the likes of VW or, say, BMW in second, but it was very impressive nonetheless. Its market share also saw significant growth, going from 1.7% in 2024 to 4.8% in 2025.
And I think it is clear evidence of BYD's strategy to become a truly global brand. If we look at Europe specifically, it's wanting to offer 2,000 points of sale this year, according to Reuters. And then if we look elsewhere in the world, I know that BYD also wants to produce and source half of its components from its Brazilian factory by the end of 2026. So as we're seeing the Chinese electric vehicle market become so competitive, and especially with the effect of price wars moving into other markets, challenging local brands with advanced technology and quite competitive prices, they're really hoping to make big gains there. But Tom, talking about Europe and electric vehicles and local brands, obviously we've already mentioned VW, but how have some other car makers performed last year?
Well, I think another brand that's worth noting is BMW. They came second in the 2025 EV table in Europe, and this was thanks to a 15.6% increase to 337,298 sales. However, despite this increase, its market share actually dropped. It went from 9.9% in 2024 to 8.7% in 2025.
And this is actually echoed in the global figures as well for BMW, because their share of the global EV market dropped by 0.5%, which means that of all the electric vehicles sold, 2.6% had a BMW badge on them. I know that BMW is really looking to push things forward now with its Neue Klasse, Tom, and that's something that you have a bit of insight into because you've seen that at some motor show events fairly recently, right?
Yeah, it's a great point because I remember when I saw the BMW iX3 at the IAA Mobility, it was one of the very few models that really excited me because it almost sort of marks a fresh era for BMW and their strategy towards EVs. And by the way, quick plug, if you want to learn more about the iX3, then you can do so by reading our launch report on autovista24.com. But of course, saying this, it's not just BMW with new EV models on the horizon. There are many brands with releases scheduled for 2026. So if I can summarize, I think this year is going to be a pivotal one for the market, and it's going to be very interesting as well, with new EVs entering the market and increased competition.
Amazing, Tom. Couldn't have said it better myself. A lot to look forward to and a lot to look out for. And if you would like to read our articles, whether that be on the European and global EV markets, or the launch report, as Tom said, or the Chinese electric vehicle market, as I mentioned earlier, then all you need to do is head over to autovista24.com. For those articles that we've already published, I'll make sure there are links down the show notes. But all you need to do to get the next article sent directly to your email inbox is sign up for our email. Just head to the bottom of our homepage and there's a form there at the bottom for you to fill out. And you can check out our YouTube channel as well. It has all our explainer videos, our launch report series, and our webinar recordings. And our next live webinar is going to be moderated by Tom. It's called Europe's Auto Forecast 2026. It's going to take place on the 1st of April. And of course, subscribe to the Autovista 24 podcast, wherever you listen to us. The European Commission has confirmed a minimum import price for a battery electric vehicle made in China. Volkswagen will now be able to export the Cupra Tavascan into the EU at or above a minimum import price. From the 11th of February 2026, the agreement will exempt the model from countervailing duties of 20.7% on top of the standard 10% import rate. Alongside the minimum import price, the car maker will also limit its import volumes. In a statement sent to Autovista24, the car maker said, Seat and Cupra welcomes the decision of the European Commission to accept Seat and Cupra's undertaking offer exempting the Cupra Tavascan from countervailing duties. The statement went on to highlight that the Tavascan is a key model for the brand and its electrification journey. The model is designed and developed in Europe and produced in China by a VW Group majority-owned subsidiary. The car maker also said the tariffs have had a significant impact on the results and performance of Seat and Cupra over 2025. But now that Volkswagen has secured this minimum import price, more brands could follow. On hearing the news, China's Commerce Ministry is now allowing car makers from the country to negotiate independently with the EU, according to Reuters. A big thank you to Autovista 24 journalist Tom Hooker for appearing in and co-producing this episode. Additional thanks go to Autovista 24 web editor James Roberts. The music was Better Find a Solution Fast by Richard Ames. Thank you very much for listening to the Autovista 24 podcast.